So if you have not, and I believe you have by now seen what happened in Washington, D.C., what a mess. What bold act of defiance and disorder. And might I add, the act of terrorism on our own American soil. So the Capitol building was stormed by a ravenous, angry, ego-centered, delusional, insane mob of pro-Trump extremists. And might I add, American terrorists. It was chaos and anarchy on Capitol Hill. So this article says the police gave more leeway to Trump supporters than to the Black Lives Matter protests in Capitol insurrection. And so this is an article by a person named Tanya Pendleton, and I thought this was a good article. So I always try to read off the person who's responsible for it, because this right here was just something that came from out of nowhere. And right now, I don't have the words except the ones that I just said, to any other words to describe how horrible this scene was and how frightening it was. So these videos that are down here, I'm not going to play them, because I believe when you play the videos, then you go a little too far with things. But I believe if you look at the news, you can see the footage. Here, there's some still pictures, um, or a still video, and you can just about see how horrific this whole thing was. So as the horrified Americans watched the pro-Trump protests in the nation's capital turn into a violent insurrection that many believe was worsened by a tepid police response because the demonstrators were predominantly white. Most of them, the majority of them, were or looked to be white. I did see some people who looked like they weren't white, but it wasn't as many. Most of the people looked white. And it's usually these far right extremist groups. So, might I add, so let's make that clear. So, on Twitter, journalist Jamel Hill, among many others, said that that scene got out of hand because Capitol Police allowed the Trump demonstrators more leeway than they did Black Lives Matter protests over the summer. So Hill's tweet was substantiated by the TikTok video viewed over 10 million times that appeared to show Capitol Police officers opening up barricades to allow the protesters onto the grounds. Who does that? So just think of this. Would they have, if it had been large crowds of black protesters and just maybe a few sprinkle of white, would they have allowed them to break in to the Capitol building? And so what would happen if they had an angry mob of black people that wanted to break in? What would that scene would have turned out like? How would they have responded to that? So the Washington Post reports that according to the law enforcement, demonstrators protesting the finalization of the Electoral College vote that would officially certify President-elect Joe Biden's victory broke into the Capitol building around 2 p.m. using a shield stolen from the Capitol police officer. Who does that? They actually stole one of the shields from the police officer. And so earlier I heard on the news they were saying that it could have also been people who were on the inside that allowed it to happen. So, as the Griot reported, through D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser ordered the D.C. National Guard the day before the support Capitol Police, they didn't appear to be in place when the breach had happened. So, the Trump supporters were able to reach the floor in the U.S. Senate. And so the Capitol was on lockdown as the breach by the protesters caused that. So the footage from multiple vantage points seemed to show, and you can see here the melee that took place. Protesters, they moved closer to the Capitol without the show of force that met most Black Lives Matter protesters nationwide, and some protesters were simply escorted from the building without arrest, as was the norm when anti-racist protests broke out this summer in the wake of the police killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, as well as the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, an unarmed Georgia black male killed by 2 white men while out for a run. And so basically this was sarcasm. Super nice of the cop to help the MAGA terrorists down the steps of the Capitol building. Are you kidding me? And so basically they treated this group of what I would say is terrorists as if they weren't terrorists, as if they were visitors just passing through. And so there's video of it, and I don't even care to show it, but it's just totally insane. But the occupation of the Capitol building lasted for over 3 hours as DC officials scrambled to find support from multitude of law enforcement agencies. So they had to scramble to find law enforcement. Would they have had to scramble if it was Black Lives Matter protesters? They would have been in formation. There would have been thousands of cops surrounding. They would have had barricades, not those little flimsy barricades that they can pick up and throw, but they would have had concrete barricades. They would have had probably maybe tactical gear. They would have had more than just shields. They would have had maybe pellet guns with maybe the rubber bullets in there. They would have been armed to the teeth. There is no way they would have made it up the steps if it was Black Lives Matter. That's my understanding. So, Secret Service and the police from nearby Arlington, Virginia, according to the Post. So it goes into, I skipped over, so it says agencies including Virginia National Guard, Federal Protective Police, Secret Service, police from nearby Arlington, Virginia, according to the Post. So a woman who appeared to be part of the protesters was shot in the melee, according to the New York Times. Farlene News later reported that the individual had died. So one of the ladies had died that was a part of it. So it's the taking of selfies with insurrectionists for me. See, look at this. People were taking photos. They were posting what they were doing. So would Black Lives Matter be able to do all of that? I don't think so. So DC Police Chief Robert Conte said that the DC police were brought in to assist Capitol Police as the situation worsened. Initially, DC police were planning to focus on the neighborhoods near the Capitol. The Capitol Police, who number about 2,200, are a federal law enforcement agency that has been around for 192 years, with sole jurisdiction over the U.S. Capitol complex and the Library of Congress as well. And so There needs to be an investigation into the Capitol Police Department's refusal to act and the initial refusal of the Pentagon to deploy the National Guard. Where were the official goons who were tossing Black Lives Matter protesters into unmarked vehicles at Williams Barr's request? And so you didn't see none of that happening to this group. So questions still remain as to then, but was the agency so unprepared, and why were they unprepared? So it was known that Trump supporters were gathering to continue to try to fan the flames of division over the presidential election. So even though Trump was asked to calm the crowd, he did so while still maintaining that the election results were fraudulent. And so just seeing Trump's tweet, which Twitter has removed, this is the language of the insurgent who leads a terrorist movement. So this is was Trump before it was removed. These are the things and the events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from the great patriots who have been badly and unfairly treated for so long. So go home with love and in peace. Remember this day forever. So this is what he left. And so, despite legal efforts to change the results of the several states, President Donald Trump and his legal team have been rebuffed, and preparations are being made for the elect Biden to assume the presidency on January the 20th. Yet demonstrators were allowed unprecedented access to breach the Capitol, storming the building where the Electoral College vote was to be certified and forcing lawmakers to shelter in place. U.S. Representative Jim Hims, Democrat of Connecticut, I believe, tweeted that they had been told to get out gas masks and tear gas had been deployed. So this is what the Post had reported around 6:55 p.m. Only 15 protesters have been arrested. Only 15 out of all those thousands that you've seen, according to MSNBC. So despite the mob, Congress says the election results will be certified tonight. So the Senate is expected to reconvene at 8 p.m. And so we're going to finish tonight. So West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin told assembled media. And so these thugs are not running us off. So finally, they see who that word best fits. Thugs. So this was crazy. So if you could see here, they were taking selfies, probably laughing about what they were doing and congratulating one another. And then you see this commotion, all these people who breached the Capitol building, and then they got to the Senate floor, and then they had to hurry up and have most of the people that were in the building shelter in place for their safety. So this is terrible. So I just want to say this is what the barricades look. Look how flimsy those barricades are. The barricades that I know I've seen at some of the protests had barbed wire. They were made of concrete. You couldn't just lift them up and throw them. But these little gates are not going to hold no one. I believe somebody or somebody's had a lot to do with how they were able to just breach this building like they did. No way Black Lives Matter would have been able to get that far to the Senate floor. But anyway, having said that, I'm going to let this video go. I just think this is just something that will also go down in history, of course, among many other things that are happening. I think every day right now is never a dull day, and I feel like 2020, they thought that was a dark year. I think we just saw, a tip of the iceberg, because I don't think this is over with. And so I want to add in there that downtown LA, and I live in LA, they were fighting. In Beverly Hills, there was protests, and in Orange County, there were protests. It wasn't as extreme until you get to downtown LA, and then you saw a lot of fighting. So if you didn't see those clips, They showed some video footage of what was going on in downtown LA. They had to actually get riot police in gear, and they rolled through to try to keep the calm. But some people actually got into some real knockdown, drag out, breaking teeth, and punching, fisticuff fighting downtown LA. It was insane. And so not the place you'd want to be at all, driving through. So I really don't believe that this is over because there's so many conspiracies that are floating around. So many people that are behind all of this. 4 dead, 14 injured is what I heard. And one for sure, I know they said was one of the rioters, a woman, and she died today. I wonder, was all of this worth dying and losing your life for? And maybe somebody will probably say, oh yes, because we didn't get what we wanted. Out of all the years that I've seen presidents come and go, in the years that I've been around, I have never ever witnessed anything such as this. Having said that, like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for listening.